Good afternoon. Welcome to our third Lunch and Learn for this academic semester. My name is Malva Reed. I'm the chief. Start all over since he's going to edit this out. Okay, good. Good afternoon. Welcome to our third Lunch and Learn for this academic semester. My name is Malva Reed. I'm the Assistant Chief Academic Officer for Graduate and Online Education and Academic Partnerships here at the University of the District of Columbia. We are so excited to have Dr. Victor McCrary here as our presenter. He is the Vice President for Research and Professor of Chemistry here at the University of the District of Columbia. Our presentation today is Contacts into Contracts. The objective is that you have many opportunities that exist for research funding. How do you know where to start? Dr. McCrary will lead you through an engaging learning session about how to leverage your networks and turn contacts into contracts through strategic proposal development. Dr. McCrary, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for presenting this afternoon.
Dr. Reed, thank you for this opportunity to be part of our Lunchtime Learning webinar series. And I appreciate all you and your team do, and our teams working together to provide our faculty and staff and students with information that's extremely important in terms of UDC and what we do in our research endeavors. What I will do is share my screen. And we will get started. Okay, so good afternoon again, everybody. Again, thank you, Dr. Reed and the Office of the Chief Academic Officer. This is called Turning Contacts into Contracts. Really, how do you from there, after you meet people or you get that idea, how do you go out and get that grant award, cooperative agreement, or contract that you may have? Because many of us on occasion, as faculty members, as staff, even as students, will meet a lot of different people, particularly because the University of the District of Columbia is a historically Black college and university. And at this time, many federal, local sponsors would like to partner with us. Also, many foundations will be approaching you and saying, we're very interested in working with you. And so here's my name and get in touch with me. But after that, the question is, how do you make that into a successful proposal and see that through? Or as they would say in the business parlance, and I'm sure Dr. Reed will tell me, how do you close? And that's why this is extremely important. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what this is about. We're going to talk about a lot of this is about relationships, because there are a lot of people who are just as smart as all of us. You may even be smarter than some of those other people. But at the end of the day, awards are given to people that they know that they've had a relationship as well as a good idea. This is a thing that derived out of a course I taught for almost 14 years on networking and politicking as a program that was part of the School of Engineering and the Wharton School at the University of Penn. And so, and by the way, talking about contacts, please add this to your Rolodex so that you can be able to get in touch with me if you have any questions about today's seminar. So my first question I always ask students, faculty, staff is, do you have your business card? And of course, today, a business card is not just one that is printed in the traditional format. You can use different types of software. You can exchange business cards using your cell phone. But the question is, do you have that information? Because again, you may be at a seminar, you may be at a workshop, and someone will say, I really enjoy that idea that you're talking about. Let's talk about more. How do I get your contact information? And so these days, you also have to be able to have contact information you can share in multiple formats. There might be some folks who are what we call old school who will look for a business card. So you should have that. There will also be people who you'll be able to change your contact information using a phone. So I would also say, get up to date with the technology and be able to exchange. And so grant proposal basics, have a story to tell. Because really, what people fund is people don't fund good ideas, people fund good proposals, but you've got to have a story to tell and a story that you can walk in. And that's why we have this bridge here, because it's the bridge between what your idea or your concept or your story, whether it is research or even training, you're getting to the other side and being able to get the resources that you need. And so, for example, the story that is very germane to us here at the University of District of Columbia, we always start off, one I will always give you is that we are about urban sustainability and urban resiliency, okay? We are very unique because we're here in the DMV. We are the only public university within the District of Columbia, and we are the laboratory for the District of Columbia government. So if you think about whether it's issues with clean water in the Potomac, or is it how do we get our K through 12 students to understand math and algebra and be prepared for the new jobs that are out there, whether we're dealing with traffic congestion and how do we incorporate bike lanes with traditional automobile. The agencies out there don't have the laboratories to do it. They have the money to carry things out, but that's where they come to the District of Columbia. So here's one aspect of the story of UDC that you want to be able to tell, as well as whatever your idea is, whether it's a National Humanity for Arts, or whether it's a National Science Foundation, is this is one unique aspect of UDC. And so, and that really comes out of the equity imperative, which was our previous strategic plan. And one of them was to develop an Office of University Research by 2022. That is going forward to talk about that UDC not only provides workforce, but also we have faculty, students, and staff who are extremely innovative and can come up with creative solutions that will solve the problems. Another part of the story, so I'm kind of, if I were telling this story, I can show that in the past 5 years, our number of proposals submitted as well as expenditures, have increased. And one thing I would say in my story about UDC that I constantly do in my role as the Vice President for Research is to say, how is UDC unique? Well, one unique point of pride is we are one of the 15 A-Bedded accredited engineering programs among HBCUs. The other thing we would talk about is getting out there. So this was a panel that was put on about 2 years ago with President Mason, that we have some lessons as an HBCU, or what we would call a minority serving institution, in terms of not only the workforce we put out, but the research. And then I would also, as part of my story, whether you had to go pitch to the mayor's office about a program you wanted to do in your school or college, or whether you had to pitch to a federal funder, whether it be, for example, the National Science Foundation, but it could be the Department of Health and Human Services, of how we have moved up in Carnegie classification and how we're increasing our research expenditures. And for example, the other part of our story at UDC, again, that will be very important for you as you submit proposals for awards, is the fact that we are a land grant institution. We are an 1862 land grant institution. So I show this chart again. Part of telling your story when you write a proposal is also the background for your institution and who you are. So I'm giving you the institutional background because each of you have your own backgrounds in terms of the degrees you have and some of the research you have done previously. But also many proposers want to know, does your institution have the research capacity? So for example, Professor Jones might be preeminent in her area. However, the question always is, does your institution have the capacity to support you? So this shows the 11 Carnegie designated R2, and at another time I'll talk about that Carnegie designation, that shows that UDC, with our research expenditures in FY22, are right up there with the other 11 R2 Carnegie designation, even though we are Carnegie designated M2. So again, it's really important as you tell your story, not to just only be passionate that the University of the District of Columbia is here to help the city We have food gardens in every ward. We're impacting every student. We're helping with every agency, but also to really have numbers, because the data really speaks for itself. And that's what convinces decision makers to say, I want to make an investment in you. Because a grant, a cooperative agreement, or even a contract to you as a principal investigator is an investment that says, I believe there's enough there that I think your idea that I am funding is worth funding, and I think it has a high probability of success. Now, let's face it. I've been on the other side as a program officer, and in terms of handing out grants, I understand that not all people are going to achieve the goals in the grants. But when I look at we'll look at their story and understand their background, the most convincing stories are the ones that I want to fund. Okay, so it's very important that you understand, as a faculty member here at the University of the District of Columbia, or as a staff or student who is part of a proposal, you understand the background of UDC and able to convince it. And we have many points of pride. So again, if you look at where we are from a Carnegie point of view, we're kind of right up there in terms of R2, in terms of expenditures, in terms of our endowment, and what we do, for example, with National Science Foundation. And if you look at UDC compared to the other schools in the area, because you may get that question if you put a proposal, well, what do you compare to Georgetown or to George Mason or Howard? You know, you can say, hey, look, while we're not an R1 institution, we have significant expenditures in research for our size and across many agencies, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, HHS. So again, it's important to understand the story and be proud of what we have accomplished so far at the University of the District of Columbia. And this will help you in getting making a convincing argument for your proposal. So if you look at, for us, for example, in NSF expenditures back in 2018, we were right up there with Gallaudet. Okay, so this is where it is extremely important to understand. So another thing, if you were telling your story to brag about UDC, is our economic impact. So the Office of University Research a few years ago commissioned a study to look at what is the economic impact that UDC makes on our community, given that the money that is invested by the city. Well, one of the things of telling your story, and if you look at this slide, it says a lot. I'm not going to read this slide, but if I got in front of the city council or the mayor's office and said, so why should I invest more in UDC? You can say, look, Mayor Bowser, Sheriff Mendelson, for every dollar you give us, we give you $4 back. Okay. And so one thing about telling your story, whatever it is not only the qualitative part, the passion you feel about the certain subject, the fact that this discovery can change the world or really impact our community, but also that you have sound data that supports the fact that someone should make an investment in you. So now, given that you understand, okay, the elements of maybe making a convincing story, okay, because in a lot of cases, that story has to be convey that passion as well as quantitative data in your written proposal, because sometimes you may also be asked to do it orally. There are some mechanics and proposal basics. So this is the grant cycle. This is some work that Hanover has done to help many organizations. And it kind of, if you start clockwise, any proposal starts with a good idea. We have resources in the Office of University Research, thanks to the Office of the Chief Academic Officer for the past few years of having people help you shape proposals, particularly to the National Science Foundation. One thing we don't have is we don't have the ideas. It's your idea. And so you come up with the idea, and then you've got to find funders. And also in the Office of University Research, we'll now be rolling out the Pivot. So I would say to everybody, please enroll in Pivot and get in touch with Cynthia Mahamet in our office. because that will push out opportunities tailored to what your interests are. Then what you do as you go around this circle, you kind of finalize your concept, you make it crisp, because, for example, as a former program officer, when I read proposals, I don't want to have to wade through a lot to find out what's the idea and what's the impact of your idea and how does it compare. And then what will happen is you will formally apply through the Office of University Research. Either you'll get the grant award, or if you don't, we would encourage to resubmit. Okay, and then you've got to do the work and prepare for funding. That's kind of the post-award. One of the things I will say is, I know many faculty members take a lot of pride and they put in their proposal, and then 6 months later you get a notice that it wasn't accepted. And in some cases, you just don't want to, you want to hide in the corner. You're so disappointed you don't want to tell anybody. Well, look, there's a lot of reasons proposals aren't funded, and it doesn't just have to be the merit of your idea. So the first thing I tell all faculty members and people who submit proposals, don't take it personally if you get rejected. What you ought to do is then ask, and specific agencies have different formats, for a debriefing. Now, that may come in a written email, it may come in a 10-minute Zoom call, but that's extremely important, because sometimes ideas don't get funded. It has nothing to do with the idea. It may just be with the amount of money that is available to that program. So, for example, if your proposal was ranked 7th, say out of 20, but as they gave out the money, they had enough money for the first 6, then your proposal didn't get funded because of lack of funding, not because the idea was not good. What that really would mean is, when you talk, you should resubmit on the next cycle. That's why it's very important to have a debrief. The other thing that's important is to include the Office of University Research in that conversation, so that we can maybe help you shape your idea, okay, given the resources we have. I can tell you a story. In one of my previous jobs, particularly at Morgan State, I had a faculty member who submitted 3 times. And I knew the person was about to give up. I said, no, let's just work this a little bit more. We had to tweak it. On the 3rd time, they got funded. And not only did they get funded, but they successfully did so well in the proposal, they were able to do work on a startup company. So the other thing about the grant cycle is perseverance is extremely important. And so again, this just summarizes, you got to start with a great idea. And I would ask you, think about your idea before you decide to go seek funding. Talk with your colleagues, talk with your relatives and friends. If you say, look, I got this great idea, it's a round thing called a wheel. I think if we put it together and you put an axle on it, you can make a thing like a cart, and this will help transportation and move things, and it's much easier than dragging things across the ground. Somebody might look at you and say, well, I read something else that somebody invented that same concept, okay, about 2,500 years ago. So you want to make sure, just because you wake up in the middle of the night with a great idea and not knocking your process, you want to make sure it's not something someone's already done in some way, shape, or fashion or form. Now, that doesn't mean that you may have come up with something like a wheel that's already been invented, but maybe you come up with a new idea of transportation like the Segway, okay, which is very radical. And some of you have seen the Segway. Now that is a great idea. So that's why it's really important. That first step over all of the other steps is really important. Talk it out, work it through. The other thing is, once you do have a great idea, come to our office and we can talk about how you can make an intellectual property disclosure in terms of making sure we can protect your idea. Your idea, I keep saying, what makes a competitive excitement. I can tell you, program officers in many agencies get tons and tons of proposals. And the question of why they fund one over the other is one that they say, oh my God, aha. So again, excitement may come through when you tell me that idea orally or in person, but that idea needs to come through exciting when you write that proposal. Okay. And so I would say that's why we ask people to start like 45 days out. If you say you're going to submit a grant, because you're not going to write the perfect proposal on the first iteration. You're going to write it. And then what you want to do, it's just like writing a great term paper. You want other people to look at it. Is this language exciting? If I'm a program officer and I'm looking for the next big thing in my area, does this convey that? So that's extremely important. And one thing about a great idea is it fills a gap, okay, in whatever field you're in. So, for example, I happen to be aware at the time when I was working at Johns Hopkins, DARPA, which is like the National Science Foundation, but they fund a lot of ideas that have defense and national security applications, asked the question, which they call the DARPA hard question, was if we had a pandemic, let's say somebody did a man-made drop of a virus on us, could we cure it in 60 days? Now, that was a great idea of, okay, I've got something that can do it in 60 days because the state of the art at the time was 3 to 5 years. Well, if you had to wait 3 to 5 years for a virus like the coronavirus, you'd wipe out a significant part of the population. But at that time in 2010, the program they were willing to work on vaccines. And one of them at that time was looking at taking advantage of mRNA technology, which, as you know, right now is the key to the vaccines that were produced during the COVID crisis. So again, when you think about your idea, how does your idea fill a gap that we currently have right now in whatever part of the field where your expertise is? And also the other thing is a lot more emphasis, particularly more, I've been in this game for well over 40 years, but now, and rightly so, there's a lot of emphasis on how do we impact communities, particularly underserved communities. How do we fill the equity gap? So how is what you're doing, your proposed idea, make us become a more perfect unit, okay? And so that is another thing that funders are looking at in terms of your proposal. So before you make the pitch, identify the agency. It might be nice to know the program officer, look at their bio, because if you get in a conversation, or there might be tidbits you put in the proposal that have some commonality. For example, maybe you and them are alums from the same place. Make sure your idea matches what they are, what they need. Okay. So you might have a hammer and everything looks like a nail, but what they're looking for is not maybe a hammer. All right. So how do you adjust your hammer to the nail that they want? Because you use a different hammer to put a nail for something that maybe you have to hang a poster versus a heavy nail that you have to put two girders together. So you got to make sure you do that. You might look at their previous funding history of things they like. Every program officer has a certain flavor of technology that she or he likes. You might want to look at what they funded in the past and make sure you kind of tweak your proposal the same way. Again, look up their bio because you can find what they're in. With Pivot that we have now, make sure your bio sketch is up to date because they're going to look at you now, okay? And then, make sure you have quad charts because in some agencies like the Department of Defense, they don't have time to read a 15-page proposal like NSF. They want to see a quad chart and then they may ask you for only a 4 or 5 page. But does that quad chart convey that idea? Here's something I say to most people who are putting in proposals is use this thing called the Hellmeyer criteria. Dr. Hellmeyer was the director of DARPA. And while this criteria was asked of many of the program officers for DARPA when they looked at proposals submitted to them, now many other agencies are starting to look at the Hellmeyer criteria as one of the things they use when they judge whether they should fund or not fund a proposal. Why? Because now there has been a real push not to do research for just the sake of research, but research to really impact the community. If you think about existential problems like climate change, this is kind of the research they're looking to fund. So they want to make sure when they read a proposal, you cut to the chase. Just tell me what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
You know, don't get into a lot of jargon or acronyms, because I can tell you those proposals don't get funded. It may sound intellectually stimulating to you, but not to them. The next thing is,
it might have been oily at one point, but another dried up.
you probably want to
Excuse me.
mute your phone, Dr. Sneed, Mike, Dr. Sneed.
Okay.
The other thing is, who cares? So if you're doing this proposal and you come out and this idea is successful, who cares? So if you're looking at, so how could I make roses purple? Might be scientifically curious, but who really cares about that? Versus if you can say, I can make something that can make telomere lengths longer in DNA, which will decrease the aging cycle. Aha, that might be something that's different. And then the other thing is kind of what we call midterm and final exams. How do we know if you're successful? NSF is an agency, for example, where they will give you a grant, say for 5 years, to work on a particular problem, and they'll fund that full 5 years. There are other agencies who'll say, okay, I like your idea, Dr. Jones, this is really great, but in the first 6 months, I need to know your milestones. And so is your milestone in the first 6 months that you're able to show proof of concept at a prototype level? And then in 12 months, you're able to show you can do 2. Because in some of those agencies, if you can't, they'll pull the money, okay? And so there's an incentive for you to really work hard on the research. This is an example of a quad chart. This is Dr. Lily Monroe Lord. This is her program. But as you can see, the quad chart is very simple, conveys a lot. You know, some people say one picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, for most program officers, that's why they like the quad chart. Instead of reading 10 to 25 pages in a proposal, if I can look at that, I see your project objectives, I see the framework of your program, okay, I can see your collaborators, the amount you're asking or previous, and then what are either, for example, this is a review quad chart, the things you've accomplished or the things you seek to accomplish and the impacts that you have. Again, this is another example of a quad chart that can be used. I would recommend as homework for each of you, if you've got a grant already, make a quad chart. And if you don't have a grant but have a great idea, also make a quad chart. So again, another tool that is used is a logic model. So which shows, and that's kind of resources, activities, results, impact. So again, that's why the first part of this talk, we talked about what are all the great things about UDC, because what they're going to look at is, well, do you have the resources to accomplish it? Okay. And let's face it, some program officers are biased. You know, some of them come from big schools. They would look at a small school like UDC and say, I'm not sure you can do that. Versus if, you know, you were Dr. Jones that came from Harvard. All right. As well as other biases they may have. So you want to show, hey, look, we can do this. Here are the activities we're going to undergo during the semester, during the summer. These are the results and these are the impacts. And what you want to do is work backwards when you put the proposal together. So if you're saying, I'm going to develop a Segway that will be used as personal use of transportation and can be used by security officers, and the impact, and this will allow people to move through airports faster, how do you work backwards to where your starting point is to achieve the outcome and the goal? And then the most important thing is, what are their aims? Writing a proposal is not like writing a technical paper to a journal, okay? You need to make sure that you're hitting what they want. And so that's why I always tell people, make a matrix, a 2-column matrix, put the keywords in the announcement that the funder puts out, Okay, so all of them put out an announcement and say, we are funding this area, and put the key words. And then ask yourself, are those key words or concepts reflected in your proposal? If they're not, you have a high probability that you won't be funded. So using that competitive matrix is good. Other things important, make sure you got the qualifications and experience. If you're going to say, look, I'm going to be working on the next type of vaccine for the next wave of COVID, okay, and you're a mechanical engineer, that may not sit well with a program manager who she or he doesn't have time to say, okay, you might be bright, but you're a mechanical engineer, and a person who's going to work on the next type of vaccine needs to understand something about biochemistry. So this is where they're going to look at your collaborations, because maybe you did come up with that idea as a mechanical engineer, but you're collaborating with a biochemist. The design, but also preliminary work. What have you done before? Are you doing this ab initio, or there's enough work that you've done based on publications and other things that you have that makes this program officer feel good and say, hey, look, I want to fund this person. And then again, make sure you have a checklist. You can show timelines that say, okay, whether it's a one-year grant or a multi-year grant, these things will be accomplished, or we plan to make these things accomplished. If, by the way, it's not bad to say, if, for example, we miss this milestone, we can go to a plan B, because that makes the funder say, okay, if we run into this roadblock, because they all know it's research. Research doesn't mean that everything is guaranteed. Research is the exploration of new knowledge. So if you can say, look, if we go down this one path, we might be able to try this other path if path A does not work. Most important thing we always say in the Office of University Research is that reading is fundamental. Read the announcement. Are you eligible? A couple of weeks ago, someone came to me, Vic, we need to go into this UDC. I saw this funding announcement. We need to write this and get this proposal in 2 weeks. I read the announcement. I said, this is only eligible to HBCUs, because it was an HBCU solicitation. It's only for R2 HBCUs going to R1. Well, they said, well, why can't we go after it? I said, because we're not Carnegie classified as R2. We're classified as an M2 school. So again, reading the announcement, when is the deadline? Making sure you get the OSP early. Things like for NSF, we have a lot of NSF proposals. What is the merit? What are the broader impacts? If you don't have all of those areas, you might have an intellectually very good proposal, but you're not showing it how it's going to impact society, okay? Or how, for example, it's going to be diverse in terms of students and other collaborators, probably won't have a chance of getting funded. So as I tell people for this section, good art ideas are not funded. Good proposals are funded. Yes, you need to have a good idea, but you really need to have a good proposal. As I would tell people before I go into this next section, when I was as a program officer, if I got 2 proposals, one from Professor Jones and Professor Smith, and both were technically equal, both were asking for the same amounts of money, but Professor Smith had followed all of the outline and even called me or, asked questions, because you can do that. Well, is this what you want? But Professor Jones hadn't. And let's say it was 5:30 on Thursday night, and I had to make my daughter's 6:15 soccer game. Guess which proposal got funded? And I could defend that, because proposal review, just like performance review, is a very subjective exercise. But if you help that person who's got to make those decisions sitting with a pile of proposals on her or his desk, you want to make sure that you get to the point, that it's clear, that you're hitting everything that they asked for in the announcement, okay? And you can show that this will be impactful, okay? And you can do that. That's why the executive summary for the proposal is extremely important. Now I'm going to go into another thing called grant proposal basics, building your network. Because as my mom used to tell me, Victor, What you know is extremely important, and make sure you have lifelong learning. But who you know is just as important, and in some cases, even more important, particularly in the grant and contract game, so to speak, and particularly here in the DMV, where it's a lot of relationship building, which is important why people get funded. So the question is building your network. In this case, I'm talking about building your network with people in the S&T community who can either will be willing to talk about the kind of work you do, the area you're in, as well as the network of people you know who are program officers, people who are willing to take a risk on you as a faculty member at the University of the District of Columbia. And this is about relationship management because it is key to reaching your goals and making your ideas become a reality. So what I teach here, which is copyrighted, is the theory of clubs. And it's all about not being right. Okay, it's not about being smart. It's about being effective. And so the thing is, people who are involved in different clubs lead to greater possibility for desired outcomes because they have many options. So what am I talking about here? So a successful person manages their club membership. Now, am I talking about a club like the AKAs or IEEE, National Society of Black Engineers? Those clubs are extremely important. But I'm also talking about informal clubs, like say you're a Catholic African American from Baltimore. Club membership, whatever club you're in, whether it's a formal club like IEEE, ACS, Greater Washington, or a club because of your affinity, it's based upon relationships. And the deeper the relationship, the more personal power you have, okay? And multiple clubs membership increases personal mobility. And once you have multiple clubs, that's where your networks spawn. Now, many people have come to me. I've been at UDC since 2018, and they said, Victor, how do I compete with those big schools and those folks? Those schools have more resources and so on. Yes, club membership is a function of socioeconomics, but it's not a barrier. And that's how you're able to build a strategy. So how do you increase your club membership? Well, first of all, you got to understand the theory of clubs. There's two circles. Your primary circle, which is kind of predeterministic. It's what you came in the world with. Okay. I have a Latin here, single female Latina born in Boston. The secondary is based by virtue of your association. Okay. And so you're an alum of UDC. Okay. You're middle class. You're married. So let me show you the clubs that I am in, and they're even always expanding. So here's my inner circle here. You really can't change those things. Those are the things you're kind of born in and brought in the world, unless you're like Michael Jackson. But this is my club. And then this is my outer club. And catch me offline. You can say, well, what do all these different means? Well, for example, I'm a member of the AT&T Lucent Club because I worked at AT&T. All right. I'm a Imagine of the Executive Club. I've been an executive now for well over 20 years. Okay. I'm a member of the Irish American Club. My dad was Irish American. Okay. African American. So there's a lot of things. What are these clubs? But what's important over the years is because being members of these clubs have allowed me to get grants in different areas because of the affinities of these clubs. So, for example, let's take the Black chemists. I'm a chemist by training. I'm a Black chemist. I've been a member of the National Organization of Black Chemists. There are Black chemists who, because of that, we were able to write successful proposals to the National Science Foundation. Okay, DARPA, some of the people that I worked with at AT&T Bell Labs were now program managers at DARPA, and they knew me, and we came up with good ideas. So that's a little bit about the club, the theory of clubs. Now, the other thing is to know your network architecture, and here's where people make mistakes. Your professional network and your personal network are two different things, and they may achieve two different outcomes. I'm not saying they're not, your personal network can't help you, but remember the two are different. So if you're a member of the Sunday Church Bridge Club, they may not have the same impact in terms of what you're trying to do in trying to say, I want to crack the club of people who are neuroscientists and I want to get into AI, unless all the members of your Bridge Club are people who are working in artificial intelligence. So again, remember what your club can, the limits of the clubs that you're in, what they can and cannot do. Okay. And that's why I always told all my students to put their network diagram together. And also what I would do is I would tell them, put the networks that you're not in, but you think you need to be in if that is your goal. And so there's a book that you can get by Harv McCay called Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And what it really means is you got to really constantly be tuning your network, because also a large part of getting contracts, grants, and awards is serendipity. I can't tell you how many times I get a phone call and says, I saw you on LinkedIn and you're at UDC and it's an HBCU. Would you be willing to do this? Okay. Or for example, oh, I see that you're an alum of Howard University. Howard's very interested in this. Would you be willing to work with us? Or do you know someone who would be willing to work with us? So constantly, beside the business cards, I would, make sure LinkedIn right now is a big thing that people use. A lot of people use it for celebratory things, but also people can talk about new research findings. And trust me, because particularly since in this era post-COVID, many program officers are not going out and traveling to universities. They're looking right up on the internet and they're putting keywords. And so if you are out there, they will find you. But if you're not, then you won't be found. And the two things I always tell people, use some time. I use a method called time blocking. So I got 40 hours of my professional work week. Besides meetings that I have to attend, I time block on certain tasks. Okay. And I don't try to wait till the end to get one task done. Set the time to also develop your life plan and strategy, particularly even as it comes to putting proposals in. It's also part of what you do as part of both your professional and personal life. And also give without looking for payback. I can tell you, your reputation is everything. If you have a reputation of giving people opportunities or pointing them the way opportunities, you will get that tenfold back in terms of opportunities, respect, and what people want, because it is about your reputation. I would say that a lot of the opportunities we've got at UDC, people would call me because they knew me, not because I'm the smartest person here at UDC. Surely I am not. But they do know that my reputation is someone who says, hey, look, I will tell you, no, we can do this, or yes, we can do this, and this is the limits of doing it. So your reputation is important. Or if they'll call me, I'll say, I don't think we can do that here at UDC, but I know over there at Howard or Morgan State or Jackson or Bowie, there are people who can do that. So also giving back will help you. And that's why also it's important to know what other people are doing in your other schools and colleges, which was what the one outcome of UDC Research Week. I finally want to say is the most important thing is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So important thing between your classes is to go out there and look at those opportunities. I would also say National Science Foundation is always looking for rotators, people to come work on proposal reviews. That's how you learn the game. You can sit in the room. And particularly at this time, they're looking for folks from HBCUs. So at least you can understand how the proposal process works, what people say behind those closed doors when they review proposals. But if you're not out there, okay, then you don't know how the game is being played. You think they're playing Bid Whist and they're playing Texas Hold'em. So I really encourage you to try to go out and get on proposal review boards, whether it's National Science Foundation, NASA, NIH, or any of the DoD agencies. Some reference materials. This is the I-Corps program. So there's a lot of emphasis these days on taking researchers and becoming entrepreneurial. You might want to look at them. There is funding for that. The book I told you about, Harv McKay, Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. It's a good weekend read because many of us who have come up as academics, we think, I wrote a great proposal. It might be my masterpiece work, just like an article sent for publication, and that the government works like an ATM. I can put the proposal in, it comes out. As I said, you might write a very good proposal, but if you haven't undertaken a lot of these things and tips that I've talked about today, it won't get funded. So this is a very good book. And finally, another selling point for our story at UDC, which you should have in every proposal, is we are a force for good. We're out there helping the community, and every school and college has some bragging points about what they do. Make sure you include that, because some of those things tip the scale for the review by a program officer to fund your proposal. And with that, I want to thank you all. I want to thank Dr. Reed in the Office of Graduate Programs. I want to thank the team at the Office of University Research. I want to thank you all for your attention, and feel free to contact me at any time and sit down and talk about how do you turn your contact into a contract.
Dr. McCrary, this was excellent. Oh my goodness, there was so much good information. The presentation will be recorded, so you will be able to find it on our YouTube channel. Before we end, would there any questions that anyone would have?
That was great. Thank you so much for that.
Yes, thank you.
So Dr. McCrary, I just want to say the information was invaluable. I mean, I think, just the 40 some minutes that you did, I think everyone in this university should actually watch it, from students to, so we may want to ask you back again, maybe next year, to just continue this dialogue, because I don't think you can hear this enough to do what you need to do and then be successful. So again, I want to thank you so much for that.
Yes, and for those on the call and Dr. Reed, one of the things we might want to do with our Lunch and Learning is next semester, let's go out to the folks, and let's go out to every school and college, and maybe they can get their faculty, and over lunch, I'd love to give this presentation.
Absolutely. And I definitely will be a supporter of that activity for next academic year. So before we end for today, I'd like to invite you to our last Lunch and Learn on Tuesday, December 5th. They're always from 12 to 1. We have a 2,000-foot glimpse at 2 CFR 200 with Alexandra Lang, Research Officer, and Alzira Harrison, Grant Management Specialist, all from the Office of University Research. So we will be looking for the announcement. We are really excited to continue this activity into our 2024 academic year from January to May. So look out for our workshops, and thank you so much for attending. Have a fantastic day.